guys, it's Jen here and welcome to Jen's World About Watercolour. So today I'm going to be doing a portrait of Bear. Bear is my little Jack Russell and yeah, he's my art room buddy. I also have Pip who's around here somewhere. I think she's down in the lounge room. Anyway, so yeah, today we're going to be doing a portrait of Bear. So let's get painting. Rightio, so here we go. So I'll start with drawing his forehead and get a rough sort of a shape of his face and around the top of his head. And now I'll rub that bit out and I'll do his ears on. So I'll do the triangles of his ears and that'll help me to get the proportion of where his eyes need to be. So I'll pop the ears on, rough up the fur around there, and then just make a little fur there. He's got a blaze on his nose, so I'll draw that in. It goes up between his eyes and that'll help me figure out where the eyes need to be. So I'll just get the shape of his blaze in, and then from that I can do the shape of his nose and mouth. And he's got a little beard. Pop his neck and shoulders in. And now I can see from the photo reference that I took of him, I can pop his eyes are just above the bottom of his ears and they go about 3/4 of the way from his blaze to the sides of his head on both sides. So I pop them in and just define the eyes a little bit. And now I pop the details in his eyes. So pop and leave little reflections where you can see in his eyes he's got two little white dots from the lights that the room where I took the photo. So I pop those little reflections in his eyes. Do some more definition on his whiskies. Now I pop his nose in and I can see by the width of his nose that his nose starts at the inner edge of both of his eyes. So that's how I came up with the size or the width of his nose. And it's about as wide as it is deep, so I'll pop sort of the same sort of proportions to get the size of his nose. And now I'm drawing his little moustache and his lips, his little puppy lips, and his beard. He's got little eyebrows. I'll widen that ear a fraction, it wasn't quite big enough. Pop his pupils in. Rightio. We're just about sorted with the sketch. Finish off that shoulder. Righto. So now I'm going to go in over everywhere that's brown with yellow ochre. So I'm doing this in my Stillman and Burn Beta Series watercolour book. Whoops, I need a bit of a damp brush there, so we'll take that out with a bit of a damp brush and run yellow ochre over his whole. Everywhere that's brown is going to be yellow ochre for a beginning. I'll do a few different layers. So in different mixes of brown. So yeah, but for now everything's going to be yellow ochre. So I'll take that over all of his browny bits. And then while it's still damp, I'm going to mix up a bit of burnt umber and drop that in while it's still damp and let it flow, because that's what watercolour does best. So that's what I love about watercolour, is you drop it in and it does its own thing. It's just beautiful. So I'm using my Sennelier watercolours. So yeah, I'll just take that burnt umber right around everywhere that's furry. Being careful to leave a little bit of the yellow ochre peeping through. That just gives it a bit of a glow and a bit of light. So now take that round the shape of his face, just leaving little furry bits. Now I'm going onto his ears. With a bit of burnt umber. Now I'm mixing a bit of burnt umber, a bit of neutral tint. And I'll just pop that into his darkest parts of his ears. His ears are very chocolatey, so yeah, I'm using a bit of neutral tint and a bit of burnt sienna and a bit burnt umber and a bit of ultramarine blue, and that makes a really chocolatey browny grey sort of colour. So just pop that into his darkest darks on his ears and rough up the edges because he's a wiry coated little jack. And now pop his little eyebrows in. And just define around the edges of some of those furry bits. Around his eyes. I'm not 100% happy with the shape of his eyes, but I can adjust that as I go along. I can work the different colours around and move his eyes around a little bit. So now again, a bit of neutral tint, bit of burnt umber, just to make a really dark underneath of his ears and around the edges. And then same for the other side. Take that up underneath. Onto the other ear. Now I'll do that. Use that same mix around his nose. So that's neutral tint and burnt umber. I'll take that all over his nose and down onto his lips. Don't know whether doggies have lips, but I'm going to call them lips. So I'm taking it down onto his lips. Now I'm going to go in just around his eye. You can't see the whites of his eyes, but I'm going to go in around the edges with burnt umber, like a pure burnt umber, no, very little water. And like I said before, I can adjust his eyes as I go along. I can move the paint around a little bit. Yeah, so again, going around that eye with the burnt umber. I'll go into the pupils with black, or with neutral tint rather. So yeah, now I'm going in a bit of neutral tint into the inner part of his nose, into his nostrils, like that. And then the very darkest parts around the edges. And then I'll go into the middle and leave little blots of the lighter colour underneath so you can see through, and that gives a little dimply bits on his nose. Now I run a bit, still neutral tint, but quite a wet wash of it, like quite watery, and I take that up his nose because you can see the black skin on his face just in that little spot there. So I'm using my size 10 brush, and I'm now going to go in with water onto his chest, everywhere that's white. So as you can see, the brush was a little bit dirty, so it's sort of a greyish tint, but that doesn't matter. So now I'm going to add a bit of ultramarine for shadow. So on his white first, oops, get that bit of stuff out of there. So now, yeah, add a bit of ultramarine, and that's creating the shadow on his chest. Now I'll go in with my size 6. And add neutral tint, pure neutral tint, around his eyelids, and I'll get into the details on his eyes a bit now. So I can reshape them a bit with the neutral tint, which is good. So now I'll do the inner part of his eye, but being careful to leave the little white reflections, this white paper, like that. And then same on the other side, do the top eyelid. Being careful to leave the little reflections on his inner black bit. And run around there. Now finish that eyelid, take the underneath eyelid. I'll adjust the shape as I go along. Do that one. Pop his little eyelashes. Now for the inner pupil, I go with a pure mix of neutral tint, and that just gives the pupil, stands out just a little bit more. I mean, yeah, it just gives it a bit more depth. Now, again, neutral tint, burnt umber onto the darkest parts of his ears, because his ears are very chocolatey. So take that around like that. Then not 100% happy with the shape of that eye, so I'll just adjust that out again with a bit more neutral tint. I think that's looking a bit better. Now I'm going in with burnt umber and defining more fur lines. So everywhere there's fur, I'm just adding it here, there and everywhere. And he's got a bit of a white patch on the top of his head, so I'll leave that for now. Just take the burnt umber around the edges of his little blaze. Just run the fur texture around his cheeks. And the other side. So now I just alter the shape of that eye fraction and that one to match. So now they're looking more symmetrical. Much happier with that, I think. And now I'm going in with just using the paint that I had on my palette. So a bit of neutral tint, but very, very, very damp. So it's just very light grey, and run that around his muzzle and his fur where he's got grey spots on in amongst all the white. It's got the odd grey hair, so I pop them in. Then a bit of a slightly darker, slightly thicker mix of neutral tint and water just around the edges of his nose and up onto his black bit that you can see just above his nose there. And he's got a few really dark hairs around the edge of his nose, like that, onto his lips. He's got very black little lips. And then I take the darkest neutral tint and run that in the darkest shadows under his ears and around the edges and his fuzzy wuzzy bits. He's a little wire-haired Jack, so pop his little rough bits around the edges of his ears, just like that. And then go the darkest part of his ears with neutral tint and burnt umber, but very little burnt umber, mostly neutral tint. And now, using a bit of what I had left of the neutral tint burnt umber mix, just watered right down to the grey on his chest. So he's got the odd grey hair around there, so I'll just rough them in like that, and that also gives a little bit of contrast to the white hair of his beard and defines the shadowy bits more. Now I'm going in with pure burnt umber and adding fur definition around his face again. So I've done about 4 layers onto a fur just to get the different depths, the different sort of tones of coat. And you can see I've just added the little fuzzy wuzzy bits on the top of his head, leaving that little white patch that he's got up there. And now I'm going ultramarine, bit of neutral tint, and into his eyebrows. And just give him really dark little bits there. Take that around the edge of his muzzle. Then add some more definition around his blaze and his whiskies on his mouth. The edges of his cheeks, and he does have a few little dark hairs amongst that, and then a few greys, a few more greys around his neck. I just do the final finishing touches on his eyes, to get that shape 100% where I want it. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of white gouache just to touch up the spots that I've lost. Just a little highlight on the bottom eyelids like that. So little reflections there. And I'll soften up the pencil lines with a bit of gouache as well. I'll go around and just touch around them a bit just to soften them up. Pop a little reflection on his nose. He's got a few little grey hairs some white hairs in amongst his fur just to soften up the browny bits. Like that. And he's got a few grey hairs on his, white hairs on his ears. Just soften up around his little blazy bit. Now I'll just add a few little burnt umbery hairs around in amongst his white, just the odd few here or there, just brings him all together. And just add some rough fur around the tips of his ears because he's a little wire coat, so he's got fuzzy wuzzy bits sticking out everywhere. Now I'm going to go just darken these shadows on his chest a little bit with a bit of ultramarine. Whoops, got a bit too much there, so I'll just move that around with a bit of water just to thin it out a fraction. But yeah, I'm quite happy. I've got a little bit of contrast happening there, so that's good. And we're just about done. So pop my signature on. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love it if you'd like and subscribe. And I guess I'll see you next video. Have an awesome day, guys. Thanks for watching. See you next time.